Today our segment with Sister Lila is entitled, very provocatively, The Queen Without a King. So during the past few weeks we found ourselves as women with the rest of society smothered, suffocating and stuck with chains at our feet. But then we also discovered a ladder, and as a way out we continue to climb the net of freedom. We also explored the networks, communications, and social interactions that generate income. And more importantly, we considered how a wealthy merchant lady and of the best of women, Sayyidah Khadija alayhi salam, may have used her privilege to benefit humanity. We untangled ourselves from the webs we weaved from insecurities and ego. So now, today, we are ready to look at the greatest expert in professional and personal areas, that of Lady Khadija alayhi salam, before she got married. Let's look at this queen without a king. So in studio with us today, activist, researcher, student of Quran, online consultant, and urban pharmacy garden mom, Sister Lila Heldzingen, to help us unpack this week's topic. Welcome again, Sister Lila. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Wa
barakatuh.
alaikum salam.
Shukran for having me.
Welcome. No, you're welcome. You're welcome. We look forward to another riveting conversation, as I say, with a very provocative title. But please proceed for us with the dua.
Sure,
Please.
no problem. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Subhanallah, we know nothing except that which Allah teaches us. Ya Allah, teach us that which will benefit us and increase us in our knowledge. That our actions be done for your sake sincerely, and do not place there in any portion farther than you. Indeed, we ask you for your love and the love of those who love you, and love for all those actions that will lead us to your love. Lighten our hearts with the Quran, beautify our characters through it, and save us from the punishment of the fire through it. Ya Allah, make the Quran approve for us and not against us. Ameen. Show us truth as truth and grant us the ability to follow it. Show us falsehood as falsehood and grant us the ability to abstain from it. Ameen.
Ameen.
And loosen our tongues, open our chests, facilitate this interview, forgive any mistakes that we've made, lead us to better, and may it benefit us in terms of the best of both worlds while protecting us from the hellfire. And peace and blessings be upon the choices of the creation, the Prophet Muhammad, and I'm going to repeat again, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the rest of the Anbiya, peace and blessings be upon them, and of course the best of women. May we become more like them, be inspired to be more like them, especially through this discussion, inshallah, and all for the sake and purpose of drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us this. Ameen thumma ameen.
Ameen. Ameen. So, the queen without a king.
Yes.
And we're speaking about Sayyidah Khadija alayhi salam.
Yes. So we've been looking at her in terms of income generation and wealth consciousness. And just we summarized this in last year's content. We looked at the 4 different types of earners through the cash flow quadrant because we wanted to see her within that context. Last week we discussed Muslim business owners and how they use the skills to go from employed to self-employed. And then we looked at how they use the capital to duplicate the businesses to invest. And then, of course, all of this is in the halal way. But then we considered Khadija alayhi salam, even pre-Islam, using a lot of these type of methods that we know about. And how she used these strategies for growth for the benefit of the community. Basically as leverage against the other wealthy people who were not very, they were not very compassionate in the way they dealt with the poor, because as we know in those times there was a lot of corruption, there was gambling, there was prostitution, women were being exploited. There's so many similarities today, so much jahiliyyah. So she, despite of all of that, and even pre-Islam, even before becoming a Muslim, she had that sense of decency and that character. So we looked at her more within that capacity. So now we're going to look at her more as a role model for women ready for marital partnership. There's a huge market online comprising of women who feel that they've lost touch with their femininity. There are a lot of female entrepreneurs, CEOs, professionals who high-ranking career women paying a lot of money and spending a lot of time with the sole purpose and focus of reclaiming their feminine energy. There are other issues with women in the workplace, like the hashtag #WeToo movement. We know that Khadija alayhi salam was referred to as tahira, which means pure, but why would a woman be called pure? What did she say, what did she do to have that reputation of decency? We know that she had a lot of proposals. Does this mean that she had a lot of attention? did she have a lot of attention overall? Were men flirty, suggestive, and in a male-dominant society that considered women to be objects, what did she hear and see daily? So what did she have to navigate in her situation that she would have the reputation of being Tahira? You understand? Like, you're not going to get caught that unless you've been tested in some way. So did her family discuss with her what was going on in the community? There's no such thing as a good businessman or woman who is ignorant about the environment that they operate in. We discussed in the orbit of Miriam how Miriam AS, like many devoted religious men and women, she sat in her mihrab, she used a screen to worship, but even she seemed to have some awareness of her people. But I often find that more religious focused people who sit and focus on their books or keep to themselves, they're more easy to shock because they're usually quite sheltered. And it can be a problem when seeking the advice of a scholar who isn't worldly aware, because they can be so stuck in theory in their worship bubble that you have to give them a lot of information. And if they're open-minded people, if they're objective open-minded, then that's not a problem. But you usually have to give them quite a lot of information of what's going on around them. But business people have their feelers out, and they're usually quite street smart and global smart. They aren't sheltered in terms of security and seeking opportunity. They must have a high sense of spatial awareness around them. So they're going to pick up on social issues quite easily. So Khadija alayhi salam doesn't come across as being vulnerable, as she seemed for the most part well established. It doesn't mean that no one stole from her or that she wasn't completely immune, but there may have been enough tribal protection given her family ties and class. But besides security, Khadija alayhi salam seems to have this feminine aura. You know, we kind of get this feel from her through the stories, even of her pre-Islam, that there's a receptiveness about her and a softness about her that is consistent no matter where you look at her in the story. So it's one thing for a woman today to succeed in a male-dominated world, but for a woman to succeed while maintaining her femininity is on another level of sophistication and mastery. So you can congratulate a man for being successful, you can congratulate a woman extra for being successful in a male-dominated industry, and now you can triple that congratulations if you find her with her maternal role and her femininity intact, because that's actually quite a challenge, because sometimes women emulate men to feel safer. Sometimes that's done on purpose. So sometimes women emulate men to feel safer or be taken seriously. There was even a female pharaoh, Hatshepsut. She used to wear like a fake beard and dress as a male on the throne so that she'd be perceived as a man and therefore, quote, taken seriously as a man. So women are still doing this, but a lot of the time it's unconscious. You know, it's not that hard to subconsciously absorb and repeat the masculine energy that repeats itself in the workplace. If you have a boss or a manager, or if there's a man that you look up to and you're learning from him, it's very easy to absorb his personality and therefore his masculine energy. So women even do that unintentionally.
So it's not just the action. It's not just about emulating the action or the particular
tonality.
It's the characteristics.
The posture of the man, it's his tonality. So you can quite easily absorb that and not realizing that you're doing
or that type of domineering energy associated or characteristic associated with a particular action.
Yeah, you can internalize that quite easily, because also in your thought process, because remember we spoke about her father being a mentor, which is going to help, but then also as a woman what's very tricky is that you actually have to filter that and kind of translate it in a way that you're still retaining your femininity. That's quite that's extra work,
of course,
that women have to put into if they want to be successful in business but also retain their femininity as women. And then we still have the gender confusion indoctrination that is apparently also leaking into our community, where society is making you question your gender now. So, and that's also, it's having a broader effect on people where masculinity and femininity are now coming into question. And if you cannot fully embrace yourself as a woman and your femininity, that is going to wreak havoc with your self-esteem, and likewise with men. So it's quite subtle, but it's also quite destructive. So then I saw this film also, in terms of security, I saw this film before I became a Muslim. It was pretty good. It was based on a true story called North County. And what happened is based on a true story where women were being pushed into the mines to work. The few women who applied were there out of desperation, similar to the woman that I mentioned in the story of Musa alayhi salam. But they faced very extreme sexual harassment, abuse and bullying in the workplace. So when I read The Ideal Muslim a couple of years ago while I was converting, I thought back to that situation to appreciate why we prefer, according to Quran and Sunnah, to facilitate women so that they are supported. But if they have to work, then ideally as self-employed or investors, but not at the mercy of like the rough and tough male crowd. Like we see with Musa alayhi salam in that situation with the woman at the well. They couldn't get close to the well because the men were too aggressive. So there's a scene where in the story there's a scene where the senior woman is taking the new woman under her wing at the mine, and she asks her, "Are you quite a cowboy or a cowgirl?" And then the new woman answers, "I'm a cowgirl." And then she says, "That's the wrong answer. Like, no, you have to be a cowboy." And then she continued to explain that she has to have that attitude and energy in order to survive. And not only is the safety of the woman a concern, but also her right to be soft, feminine, and receptive self is also concerned in our deen as well. So there are men who are exhausted with having to keep up the macho pretense to avoid being bullied. I've seen a young woman in her 20s have a breakdown because she was so tired of like having to act macho, or having to act tough in a ghetto environment every day, because she said that she would be targeted if she didn't have this tough exterior, but it was exhausting. It was psychologically tiring having to put up that pretense all the time. Then we have feminist author Errol Levy. So that's about the protective issues. But then there's this other side of women trying to be men or trying to be like men. So we have feminist author Errol Levy, who wrote Female Chauvinist Pig, The Rise of Raunch Culture. She discusses, among many things, how women executives were doing things like smoking cigars and going to strip clubs with guys while exploiting other women for profit. Even though Errol Levy isn't religious, her observational book echoes the sentiments of Yasmin Mujahid, and that is when we try to be like men, then we're putting them on pedestals. So you wouldn't try to be like men if you thought they were inferior. Okay, and you wouldn't bother if you thought they were equal to you. So you can't claim equality to men and then claim inferiority to them at the same time, because that's basically what women are doing. You're trying to be like men, so you're actually saying that they're superior, but then they can't be equal to you if they're superior to you. You see, because if they're superior to you, then you're inferior to them, therefore you're not equal. If that makes sense. There's a logic there, you see. So, it's just interesting to see Errol Levy, who's not religious, kind of connecting the dots, because people who are not, because we have a religious bias like Mujahid, so we tend to skim, whereas people who it's kind of like looking at pre-Ibrahiem AS, Ibrahiem AS pre his epiphany towards faith, Iman, when he's connecting the dots with critical thinking. So with this book, you see a lot of that connecting the dots very thoroughly. It's interesting to see that thought processing. And then locally, getting back to the protection issue, there was a woman who had a taxi business 2 years ago, but it shut down due to threats. And it's not just women. Recently, we've had Bangladeshi men and Indian business owners in our community targeted and abducted by syndicates, according to I saw it on the Instagram on Radio 786. So protection and provision, they usually go together. And that's also why the Islamic golden era didn't last, because Muslim leaders didn't invest in their military, and as much of the failing of the community is the lack of reconciliation between the raising of capital and the defense. So we already see the cracks in early with the Sahaba after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he encouraged both. So you'll find directly under his leadership, he encouraged both. But then when he passed away, we see those cracks, that there's a split between the provision and the protection side. They have to go together, and that's why you find in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to those who are more masculine that they have been given this leverage and favor to protect and to provide. And so there was a time where we used to associate the masculine with protection and provision. You see that those things have to come together. It's about accountability and responsibility. And so with this whole breakdown with gender identity is also a breakdown in that sense of accountability. Because now the lines become completely blurred. Yeah. So then who's accountable and responsible for what then? You see. So, and as I've said about maternalism, about how it was a holistic movement, and then that went to the extreme where nobody could adapt it anymore. Likewise with jihad, because jihad used to be about self-defense, activism, protecting and defending yourself for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bringing all those actions in alignment with the broader scope. But now when people today, they think jihad, they think of, blowing yourself up and killing innocent people. So it's become like this extreme narrative that you can't mention without repercussion. And we're finding a similar issue with the concept of masculine as well. Because when people think masculine, you actually have to specify positive masculinity. You can't just say masculinity anymore, because then people automatically think of the toxic, because much like maternalism and the concept of jihad, it's been taken to an extreme, a very unhealthy and toxic extreme, unfortunately. So, are we going for a break soon?
We have another, Zubair, another 3 minutes. Okay. So complete that thought, and then we can pick up. Then we can pick up on the next part after the break.
Okay, so look, in terms of masculinity, we find a lot of men, even if they're not religious, have an intuition and inclination towards being protective and wanting to provide. And Khadija alayhi salam was clearly coming from a place of abundance, but why didn't she accept the proposals of wealthy men and increase her protection? Because, she herself had this talent for provision,
Yeah.
and she had this interest in assisting women and children. She's, like we said before, she used to marry them or to the men that she used to employ. But she's in a society where men definitely, as a culture, they see females as possessions, and we find that when men see women as possessions, that's where that intuition or that fitra towards being protective and providing seems to go out the window. So before we start bridging into the marital relations, let's look again at the concept of poverty consciousness, because Khadija alayhi salam, she had proposals, but she didn't accept. She didn't just marry. She didn't just marry the next man. She was like holding out for the best man, but she wasn't just married the next man.
Yes.
So this is where, in terms of business, we spoke about poverty consciousness, because when we're dealing with business, investments, and income generation, one of the issues we fight is poverty consciousness. Poverty consciousness is when a person has a scarcity mindset. Scarcity mindset is when you actually have enough, but you think that you think there isn't enough. You think that there's not enough to go around. So the person with scarcity mindset, he or she has a sense of limitation, and this can make a person desperate or clingy. I know someone who worked for an organization which was exploiting him, but he was just too insecure to leave. So in a sense, he stayed in an abusive situation because he was too. He told me, like, I'm too. I said to him, why didn't you leave this organization? No, I'm too insecure to go because he could have actually done quite well by himself, but he was just too insecure. And we find that women in domestic abuse situations, similarly, we find that there's a scarcity. Am I even pronouncing it correctly? Scarcity mindset.
Well, I would have said scarcity, but
scarcity, that sounds better. Scarcity mindset. So women also in abusive relationships tend to have a scarcity mindset as well. That's part of the reasons why they get locked into that abusive
I was just going
situation.
to say it's something that you can take from a purely business sort of frame or model into very different facets of one's life.
People tend to settle, or they tend to sell out, or they tend to compromise because they don't think that there's enough.
There's enough value, or they don't recognize value.
Yeah.
So whether it's value within yourself or value within a business proposition or whatever it may be.
Exactly. So like Melanie Tonya Evans, expert on narcissism, quantum healing therapy, and narcissistic abuse recovery, made this analogy. She says that a narcissist is somebody that'll come to your door with a pizza, and if your kitchen is empty, you're more inclined to let him in with the pizza. But if she says, if your pantry is full, if your pizza is full with steak and all the best food that you possibly have, you're not going to accept him with his pizza. You don't need anything that he's offering you. You just don't need it. So in Islamic translation, this would be translated into, there's a greater fitna of lowering your standards to accommodate someone who isn't up to scrap when it comes to deen, and here specifically character, when you are not full and interpersonally self-sufficient. So now when it comes to relationships and finance, it's about being financially self-sufficient. But now we're talking more about the emotional self-sufficiency and the interpersonal development that actually causes you to not have that scarcity mindset regarding men and relationships.
And again, then a sort of a transitioning. I'm thinking back to when we were speaking about the whole notion about transitioning from surviving to thriving. And so this type of, from a scarcity mindset to, I suppose, to a thriving mindset.
Yes.
But let's pick up on that after the break, Sister Lila. You are tuned to Community Pulse on Radio 786 100.4. You are currently listening to our segment on matters of social justice. Our topic for today is the Queen Without a King. Stay tuned. We'll be back just after the break.